My parents stood in the marble foyer of their Westchester estate, champagne glasses raised, as my mother announced to their dinner guests that I'd probably be renting forever. "Some people just aren't meant for homeownership," she said with that practiced sympathy that felt more like a eulogy. What she didn't know was that Marcus had dropped me off 30 minutes earlier from a closing appointment where I'd just signed papers on my second investment property. A 4-unit building in Austin that would generate $4,800 a month in passive income. My mother called me financially irresponsible while I owned more real estate than anyone in that room under 40. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sophia Bennett, and at 30 years old, I've become an expert at living in two completely different financial realities. In one world, I'm the daughter my parents see, struggling in Austin with what they call my little online venture, barely making rent, too proud to accept their help or their vision for my life. In the other world, the real one, I'm a digital marketing consultant who cleared $200,000 last year, owns a renovated duplex in East Austin that's tripled in value, and just closed on a historic fourplex near the university that I'll renovate and flip within 18 months. I drive a paid-off Tesla that my parents think is a used Civic. I vacation in Tulum while telling them I'm doing a staycation. I wear thrift store finds to family dinners while my closet at home contains carefully curated investment pieces. Every interaction with them is a performance, and I've been playing this role for almost 4 years. The dinner party where my mother delivered her latest assessment of my financial failures was a Saturday evening tradition I'd learned to endure. We gathered at their 6,000 square foot colonial in Westchester County, the kind of place where even the doormat cost more than most people's monthly rent. My younger brother Christopher had just announced his promotion to junior partner at his law firm, earning nods of approval and proud tears from our mother. "Such an accomplishment, darling," she'd gushed, her perfectly manicured hands clasping together like she was accepting an award on his behalf. "This is what success looks like, building something substantial, something real." Then her gaze had shifted to me, seated between two of her country club friends, and I'd felt that familiar tightening in my chest. I always knew when she was about to deploy one of her concerned observations disguised as maternal worry. Perhaps Sophia could learn something from her brother's dedication. He understood the value of a stable career path, of building equity in a reputable firm. She'd paused, letting the implications settle over the table like dust. Meanwhile, Sophia is still experimenting with her computer hobbies in Texas. I'd taken a sip of wine, expensive Bordeaux because Patricia Bennett never served anything less than exceptional, and said nothing. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus had kissed me goodbye in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center, our usual drop-off point. "You're a better actor than anyone in Hollywood," he'd whispered, knowing I was about to spend 3 hours pretending to be someone I wasn't. "Just a few more hours," I'd replied, already exhausted by the prospect. The closing that morning had been exhilarating, signing document after document that proved I was building an empire my parents couldn't even imagine. But now I had to transform back into struggling Sophia, the daughter who couldn't get her life together. "Computer hobbies," my mother had said, as if my 6-figure consulting business was equivalent to playing video games in my childhood bedroom. What would they say if they knew the truth? That while they dissected my failures over $60 stakes, I was calculating renovation costs and projected rental yields in my head. That the duplex I'd bought 3 years ago for $250,000 was now worth $750,000. That I had a diversified investment portfolio, a retirement account that would make their financial advisor weep with joy, and enough liquid assets to weather any economic storm. That I'd done all of this without a single dollar of their money or a moment of their approval. I'd hidden my success for 4 years now, ever since I'd purchased that first property and realized that telling them would be worse than staying silent. 4 years of maintaining a studio apartment in a less desirable Austin neighborhood that I filled with IKEA furniture and kept just believable enough for their occasional surprise visits. Yes, my mother had keys to that apartment too, because Patricia Bennett collected keys to spaces she believed she had the right to monitor. The actual apartment served as a museum of my supposed failure, carefully curated with overdue bill notices I printed myself, cheap furniture that looked worn, and a general atmosphere of someone barely keeping their head above water. My real home, the one I'd bought with my own money and renovated with my own vision, sat in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in East Austin. Nothing extravagant by my parents' standards, just a 1920s duplex with original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, and a backyard where Marcus and I had installed a vegetable garden and strung cafe lights for evening dinners. I lived in one unit and rented the other to a young couple who paid enough to cover my entire mortgage plus property taxes. The place appreciated $30,000 last quarter alone. We had houseplants thriving in every window, a record collection that Marcus obsessed over, and artwork from local artists covering walls I'd painted myself. It smelled like coffee and the lavender candles I bought from the farmer's market, and it was entirely, completely mine. Are you even listening, Sophia? My mother's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade through butter. I was explaining that Margaret's daughter just bought a condo in Manhattan. With her parents' help, of course, because that's what families do. They support each other. They don't let their children struggle needlessly out of some misguided sense of independence. I'm listening, I'd said, which was technically true. I was listening to her explain how I should accept their money, their control, their vision of what my life should look like. How I should move back to New York, get a real job at a real company, and stop wasting my potential on this Texas experiment. How homeownership was something that happened with family money and family connections, not through whatever it was I thought I was doing. Margaret was asking about you, Mother continued, her voice taking on that particularly sharp quality that meant she was building to something. I had to tell her you were still finding your footing financially. She offered to have her husband look at your resume. He has connections at several Fortune 500 companies. Real positions with benefits and stability. Finding my footing. As if I hadn't been running marathons while she thought I was still learning to walk. I thought about the closing that morning, sitting across from the seller and their agent, my own real estate attorney beside me, signing papers that would add another property to my growing portfolio. The seller had been impressed by my renovation plans, my financing approval, my clear vision for the property's future. You're young to be building a portfolio like this, he'd said with genuine admiration. Most people your age are still renting and complaining about student loans. I'd smiled and thanked him, feeling that surge of pride that came from being recognized for actual achievement rather than potential. That feeling was the opposite of what I felt now, sitting in my parents' dining room, being pitted by people who had no idea what I'd accomplished. Maybe I should look at those opportunities, I'd said finally, knowing the answer would deflect without committing. The words tasted like ash, but they bought me peace for another evening. Mother had relaxed slightly, temporarily satisfied that her guidance was being considered. The conversation shifted to safer territory, Christopher's upcoming vacation to the Hamptons, the country club's new tennis pro, and which of their social circle was divorcing and why. I nodded at appropriate intervals, made agreeable sounds, played my part in this theater of familial expectations. But my mind was already back in Austin, where Marcus would be waiting at our actual home with takeout from our favorite Thai place and updates on the day's showings for potential tenants. Where I wasn't Sophia Bennett, the disappointing daughter who couldn't launch, but simply Sophie, the woman who'd figured out how to build wealth on her own terms, even if she had to hide it from the people who claimed to want the best for her. The duplex had been my declaration of independence, purchased at 26 when I'd finally saved enough for a down payment through brutal work hours and extreme frugality. My parents thought I was barely surviving in Austin. The reality was that I'd been living in a house hack situation, renting rooms from an older woman for almost nothing while building my consulting business 16 hours a day. Every dollar I didn't spend on rent went into my investment account. Every client I signed brought me closer to that down payment goal. I'd eaten rice and beans for dinner more nights than I could count, not because I had to, but because I was building something bigger than comfort. When I'd finally called my parents to tell them I was staying in Austin permanently, my mother had actually cried. Real tears, not the performative kind she deployed at charity functions. You're throwing your life away, she'd said, her voice breaking in a way that might have hurt if I didn't know those tears were for the daughter she'd imagined, not the one I actually was. You have a degree from Cornell. You could work anywhere, do anything. Instead you're choosing to waste away in some second-tier city doing freelance work that will never provide security or stability. What she'd heard was that I was staying in Austin to continue my precarious freelance existence. What I'd meant was that I was staying in Austin because I'd just closed on a property that would serve as the foundation of my real estate empire. But I hadn't told her that second part, and in that moment of omission, the double life had truly begun. Growing up in the Bennett household was like living inside a financial spreadsheet where every line item of your life was scrutinized for return on investment. The house itself, a sprawling estate in Westchester County with more square footage than purpose, stood as a testament to my parents' belief that wealth was meant to be displayed, announced, and used as evidence of worth. My mother, Patricia Bennett, treated life like a continuous performance review where she was both judge and jury. My father, Robert Bennett, was different in the way that water is different from ice, same substance but different presentation. Where my mother was sharp pronouncements and cutting assessments, he was quiet disappointment and resigned sighs. He'd built a successful commercial real estate development firm, the kind of success that came with country club memberships and political donations, but he'd done it by following every conventional rule in the book. College at Yale, MBA from Wharton, 20 years of 16-hour days climbing a ladder that someone else had built. He looked at my choices with the confusion of a man who'd followed the recipe exactly and couldn't understand why I'd decided to cook something entirely different. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Barrett family values were carved into marble and presented as universal truth. Success meant visible, corporate, and preferably located in Manhattan or Boston. Marriage meant someone from a similar background with a similar pedigree, preferably met through family connections or alumni networks. Homeownership meant a substantial property purchased with family assistance, because that's what generational wealth was for, smoothing the path for the next generation to continue the legacy. My choices, my career, my entire life in Austin, violated every single one of these commandments. My childhood was a masterclass in conditional approval. I attended the right schools, not because I wanted to, but because Bennett's had always attended them. Dalton for elementary, then boarding school at Choate Rosemary Hall, then Cornell for undergrad. My schedule was managed with the precision of a corporate merger. Piano lessons that I tolerated until I quit at 14, much to my mother's horror. Horseback riding at the club until I developed allergies that even her determination couldn't overcome. Debate team, not because I enjoyed arguing, but because it looked impressive on college applications. French immersion summers, etiquette coaching, and endless networking events where I was paraded like a show horse, introduced as our daughter Sophia, top of her class, heading to Cornell. Every achievement was measured against an invisible standard that somehow I never quite reached. Straight A's were expected, not celebrated. Student government positions were the bare minimum. When I got into Cornell, my mother's response was a satisfied nod and a comment about how Christopher would probably get into Harvard when his time came. There was no space in the Bennett household for being good enough. There was only the constant pressure to be better, to be more, to be the kind of daughter who could be mentioned in the same breath as other people's exceptional children. The only person who ever pushed back against this machinery was my grandmother, my father's mother, who'd grown up poor in Brooklyn and never quite fit into the world my parents had built. She died when I was 19, leaving me a letter that I still kept in a locked box in my real home. Sophia, she'd written in her shaky handwriting, "Your parents love you, but they love the idea of who you should be more than they've ever bothered to know who you are. Don't spend your whole life trying to become their idea. It's a prison with very expensive wallpaper." At the time, I hadn't fully understood what she meant. I was still deep in the programming, still believing that if I just achieved enough, excelled enough, became impressive enough, I'd finally earn the unconditional approval I craved. I graduated Cornell with honors, got recruited by a prestigious marketing firm in Manhattan, and moved into an apartment in the city that my parents subsidized because that's what successful families did. For 2 years, I played the part perfectly. 70-hour work weeks, networking happy hours, the right clothes, the right gym membership, the right everything. I was also miserable in a way that felt like drowning in slow motion. The job that looked so impressive on paper felt soul-crushing in practice. I was creating marketing campaigns for luxury products that nobody needed, making rich companies richer, spending my days in windowless conference rooms arguing about brand positioning for bathroom fixtures. My boss was a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her career and expected everyone else to do the same. My colleagues were competitive sharks who saw every interaction as a zero-sum game. My life was an expensive treadmill where I was running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. The breaking point came during a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I was 24, exhausted from another crushing week, and my mother was holding court about Christopher's acceptance to Columbia Law. She was radiant with pride, already planning his future, talking about the firms that would recruit him, the connections he'd make, the trajectory he was on. Then she'd turn to me with that particular expression that meant she was about to deliver feedback disguised as concern. "Your work is going well, I assume," she'd said, though it was phrased as a statement rather than a question. Thompson mentioned they're looking for bright young talent in their development division. I could arrange an introduction. His firm is much more prestigious than where you are now. I'm happy where I am, I'd lied, because the truth felt too complicated to explain. Happy, she'd repeated, as if the word was foreign. Sophia, happiness is what happens after you've built security. Right now you should be focused on advancement, on positioning yourself for leadership roles. This lateral contentment you're expressing concerns me. It suggests a lack of ambition. Lack of ambition. I'd been working myself into exhaustion trying to climb a ladder I didn't even want to be on, and she thought I lacked ambition. Something had cracked open inside me during that dinner, a realization that no amount of achievement in the path they'd chosen would ever be enough because it wasn't my path. I was performing someone else's life, wearing someone else's ambitions like an ill-fitting suit. 3 months later, I'd visited Austin for a friend's bachelorette party and fallen in love with the city in a way I hadn't expected. It was warm and weird and unpretentious. People wore whatever they wanted. Success was measured in creativity and innovation rather than pedigree and polish. The cost of living was reasonable enough that you could actually build something without generational wealth. I'd met people at coffee shops who owned businesses they'd started in their 20s. I'd seen food trucks that were booked months in advance. I'd felt something I hadn't felt in New York, the possibility that I could build a life that was actually mine. The decision to leave New York and move to Austin was treated by my parents like I'd announced I was joining a cult. My mother had actually staged an intervention, gathering family members to talk sense into me. My father had pulled me aside and explained, in his quiet way, that this was a mistake I'd regret, that I was throwing away advantages people would kill for, that Austin was fine for a vacation but not for building a serious life. But I'd gone anyway, subletting my Manhattan apartment, packing my car, and driving south with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I'd told them I was taking a gap year to figure things out, that I'd probably be back within 6 months. That had been 8 years ago. Those first years in Austin were harder than I'd admitted to anyone. I'd arrived with savings and confidence, thinking my Cornell degree and New York experience would immediately translate to opportunity. Instead, I discovered that building something from scratch required a completely different skill set than climbing an existing ladder. My consulting business started slowly, just a few clients from my New York network who were willing to work with me remotely. I'd lived cheap, really cheap, renting a room in a house with 3 roommates, eating at taco trucks, biking everywhere to save on gas and parking. But I'd also been happier than I'd ever been, doing work I actually enjoyed, setting my own hours, building relationships with clients who valued my expertise rather than my connections. I'd started learning about real estate investing from podcasts and books, becoming obsessed with the idea that I could build wealth through property rather than just trading time for money. I'd calculated and planned and saved with an intensity that would have impressed my parents if they'd known about it, but they didn't know because I'd learned early on that telling them about my plans just invited criticism and unwanted intervention. The duplex purchase at 26 had been the culmination of 3 years of brutal saving and strategic planning. I'd found the property through an off-market connection, a distressed sale from an older couple who needed to liquidate quickly for medical bills. It was a disaster cosmetically but structurally sound, the kind of opportunity that most people overlooked because they couldn't see past the dated kitchen and overgrown yard. I'd negotiated directly with the sellers, gotten a good faith discount because I was willing to close quickly with minimal inspection contingencies, and bought it for 40% below market value. Then I'd spent 6 months renovating it myself, learning skills from YouTube videos and helpful contractors at Home Depot. I'd torn out carpet, sanded floors, painted every surface, updated fixtures, and landscaped the yard. When I'd finished, I had a beautiful duplex worth significantly more than I'd paid for it, and rental income that covered my mortgage and then some. I'd moved into one unit and rented the other, effectively living for free while building equity. That should have been the moment I told my parents, showed them what I'd accomplished, proved that my path was working. Instead, I'd kept quiet, because I knew with absolute certainty what would happen if I told them. My mother would find problems. The neighborhood wasn't good enough. The property was too small. I should have consulted with their real estate attorney. I should have taken their money for a proper down payment on a proper home in a proper area. They would turn my achievement into evidence of poor judgment, and I couldn't bear to have this one pure success contaminated by their criticism. So the double life had begun. I'd maintained the studio apartment that they knew about, the one that signaled struggle and poor choices. I'd kept my real home secret, along with the growing balance in my investment accounts and the increasingly impressive revenue from my consulting business. Every phone call became a performance. Every visit required staging and preparation. I became an expert at living two completely different financial realities, and the gap between them grew wider every year. The Saturday dinner where my mother made her comment about me never owning property was actually the third family gathering that month. My brother Christopher had become the family's main source of pride, each milestone in his legal career treated like a national holiday. He'd recently made junior partner at a white shoe law firm in Manhattan, the kind of achievement that sent my mother into raptures of satisfaction. Finally, someone in the family was living up to their potential, she'd said more than once, the implication hanging in the air like smoke. What made the evening particularly surreal was that I'd spent the morning at a closing for my second investment property. The fourplex near the University of Texas campus had been on the market for barely 48 hours when my real estate agent called me. It was exactly what I'd been looking for, a historic building with good bones in a neighborhood that was gentrifying rapidly. The owner was an older woman who'd inherited it from her late husband and wanted to sell quickly to move closer to her daughter in California. She'd listed it below market value because she didn't want the hassle of a prolonged sale process. I'd toured the property on Tuesday, made an offer on Wednesday, and had it accepted by Thursday morning. My financing was already arranged through a portfolio lender I'd built a relationship with after the duplex purchase. My real estate attorney had expedited the paperwork. By Saturday morning, I was sitting in a conference room signing document after document, officially becoming the owner of a 4-unit building that would generate nearly $5,000 a month in rental income once I completed some basic renovations. The seller had gripped my hand after we'd finished signing. "You remind me of myself at your age," she'd said, her eyes bright. "My husband and I bought our first rental property when I was 28. Everyone said we were crazy. Now I'm retiring comfortably because we took that risk. You're going to do wonderfully with this building." I'd driven away from that closing feeling like I could fly. This was my 4th property overall, the second one I'd purchased in the last year. My real estate portfolio was now worth over $1.2 million, with equity of about $400,000 after mortgages. I was 30 years old and financially independent in a way most people didn't achieve until their 50s, if ever. I'd built this empire from scratch, with no family money, no inheritance, just strategic planning and relentless execution. Then Marcus had driven me to Westchester, kissed me goodbye in that shopping center parking lot, and I'd transformed back into struggling Sophia for another evening of being pitted by people who had no idea what I'd accomplished. The dinner itself was predictably painful. My mother had seated me between 2 of her book club friends, both women who'd married well and now spent their time managing household staff and planning charity galas. They'd asked about my life in Austin with the kind of polite interest that barely masked pity. "Still doing the computer work?" one had asked. "That must be so uncertain compared to a real salary position." "It keeps me busy," I'd replied, taking a sip of wine and wondering what they'd say if they knew I'd cleared more income last year than their husbands probably made in their corporate positions. The conversation had eventually turned to real estate, as it always did in my parents' circle. Property values were a favorite topic, a way to discuss wealth without seeming crass. Margaret, one of my mother's closest friends, had mentioned that her daughter Vanessa had just bought a condo in Murray Hill with help from Margaret and her husband. 2-bedroom, doorman building, very safe area, she'd said proudly. "We gave her the down payment as an early inheritance. That's what family money is for," helping the next generation establish themselves properly. My mother had nodded approvingly, then delivered the line that would stick with me for days. That's wise planning. Some people will be renting forever, but it's so important to get on the property ladder early. She'd glanced at me with what she probably thought was sympathy. Sophia probably won't be in a position to buy for years, not with her current situation. Current situation. As if my life was a temporary condition I'd eventually recover from rather than a deliberate choice I was executing brilliantly. I'd sat there, keys to 4 properties in my purse, and said nothing while a table full of people discussed my financial inadequacy like I wasn't even there. Christopher had actually tried to defend me, which was new. Mom, maybe Sophia's priorities are different. Not everyone wants to own property right away. Some people value experiences over assets. He'd meant well, but his defense was almost worse than the criticism. The assumption that I wasn't buying property because I valued experiences, as if I was some irresponsible millennial spending all my money on avocado toast and international travel rather than building wealth. The truth was I valued both experiences and assets, and I was successfully acquiring both while they all assumed I was floundering. After dinner, my mother had cornered me in her sitting room, a space she'd decorated entirely in shades of cream and gold, designed to intimidate rather than comfort. I want to talk to you about something, she'd said, settling into her favorite chair like a judge taking the bench. Your father and I have been discussing your situation. My situation. There it was again, that phrase that reduced my entire life to a problem requiring their intervention. We're concerned about your future, she'd continued. You're 30 now, Sophia. That's a significant milestone. Most women your age are established, married, building equity in property. You're still essentially where you were at 25. I have built things, I'd started to say, but she'd waved this away. Playing around with consulting work isn't the same as building a real career. And living in rentals at your age, it's not sustainable. We'd like to help you. We're prepared to give you a substantial sum for a down payment on a proper condo, somewhere safe, somewhere that will appreciate. Connecticut or back in New York. Somewhere where you can start building real wealth. The offer was substantial, she'd meant it. My parents could easily afford to gift me $100,000 for a down payment without feeling the dent. But the strings attached to that money would be steel cables, binding me to their vision of what my life should look like. They'd have input on which property I bought, where it was located, how I furnished it. The gift would come with expectations, obligations, and the kind of control I'd spent 8 years establishing distance from. I appreciate the offer, I'd said carefully, but I'm okay managing on my own. Sophia, don't let pride get in the way of practical help. Your father built his business with assistance from his family. That's how generational wealth works. You accept help, you build on that foundation, you pass it forward. What she didn't understand was that I didn't want their foundation. I wanted to build my own, brick by brick, property by property, on my own terms. I wanted to prove, mostly to myself, that I could create financial success without the Bennett name opening doors or the Bennett money smoothing paths. Every property I bought without their help was evidence that I was capable, that I'd made the right choice, that my way worked even if it looked different from theirs. But I couldn't say any of that without revealing what I'd already built, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'll think about it, I'd lied, and she'd accepted this with a satisfied nod, believing she'd planted seeds that would eventually take root. The drive back to the city had been quiet. Marcus picked me up at our usual spot, took one look at my face, and simply drove. We'd ended up at a diner in New Jersey, one of those 24-hour places that smelled like coffee and served breakfast at midnight. He'd ordered waffles. I'd gotten eggs I barely touched. How bad was it, he'd asked finally. She offered me money for a down payment. That's good, isn't it? He'd been genuinely confused. I mean, free money for real estate. It's not free. It comes with control and judgment and their vision of what my life should look like. If I take their money, I'll never know if I could have done this on my own. Babe, you have done it on your own. You own 4 properties. You're financially independent. You've built a portfolio most people twice your age would envy. Taking a gift from your parents wouldn't erase that. But it would change the story. Right now, everything I have, I earned. Every property, every dollar, every achievement is mine. If I start taking their money now, it retroactively changes everything. Suddenly I'm not self-made, I'm family supported. And they'll use that as evidence that I needed them all along, that my way wasn't working, that I should have just done what they wanted from the beginning. Marcus had reached across the table and taken my hand. When are you going to tell them? The question I'd been avoiding for 4 years. When was I going to stop hiding my success? When was I going to stand in front of my parents and prove that I'd built exactly what they said I couldn't? When was I going to demand recognition for the empire I'd created in the shadows? Soon, I'd said, knowing it was probably another lie. After this next renovation. After I hit the next milestone. After I felt secure enough in what I'd built that their criticism couldn't touch it. But the truth was, I was starting to realize there would never be a perfect time. There would never be enough properties or enough money or enough success to make them see me differently. At some point, I'd have to choose between their approval and my authenticity, and I was terrified of making that choice because I already knew which one I'd pick. The fake apartment I maintained in Austin had become increasingly elaborate over the years. What had started as a simple studio with minimal furniture had evolved into a full stage set, complete with carefully curated details designed to sell the story of struggle. I had overdue bills printed and strategically placed on the counter. I kept the furniture cheap and mismatched, the kind of pieces you'd find at garage sales or on neighborhood buy nothing groups. The walls were bare except for a few generic prints. The refrigerator was usually empty except for basics. Even the mail that accumulated was part of the performance, carefully sorted to remove anything that might reveal my actual financial situation. My parents had keys to this apartment, naturally. Patricia Bennett collected keys the way some people collected art, as symbols of access and control. She'd show up unannounced maybe 3 or 4 times a year, claiming she was in the area for business or visiting friends. These surprise inspections were designed to catch me in lies, to verify that I was actually living the struggling life she believed I was living. Each time, I'd get a text from my building manager who I'd tip generously to warn me when anyone used my spare key. Then I'd have 30 minutes to make sure the apartment looked appropriately desperate. The elaborate deception was exhausting, but the alternative was worse. My real home, the duplex I'd bought and renovated, was everything the fake apartment wasn't. It had hardwood floors I'd refinished myself, spending weeks on my hands and knees with a rented sander. The kitchen had been completely gutted and rebuilt with custom cabinets I'd found at an architectural salvage yard. The backyard was an urban oasis with raised garden beds, string lights, and a pergola Marcus and I had built one weekend from a design we'd found online. My tenant in the other unit was a graduate student who paid $1,500 a month, which covered most of my mortgage payment. I'd decorated my side with art from local galleries, plants that actually thrived, and furniture I'd chosen because I loved it, not because it was cheap. The breaking point started with something small, as these things always do. Marcus and I were having dinner at home, my real home, celebrating the fourplex closing with Thai takeout and cheap champagne. We'd spent the evening reviewing renovation plans, calculating potential returns, and dreaming about the next property. He'd been looking at listings on his laptop when he suddenly closed it and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk about something," he said, and my stomach dropped in that way it does when you know a difficult conversation is coming. "I'm listening," I replied, setting down my spring roll. "This double life thing. It's getting harder to watch. You just bought your 4th property. You're killing it financially. You're living your dream. And you can't tell the people who are supposed to love you most. Do you realize how messed up that is? I've explained why I can't tell them. They'll ruin it. They'll criticize every choice. They'll try to take credit or offer unsolicited help that comes with strings attached. This way, what I've built stays mine. But it's not just yours anymore. It's ours. We've been together for 3 years, sophomore. I helped you renovate the duplex. I've been to every property closing. I've listened to you strategize and plan and execute. I'm part of this life you've built, and I don't exist to your family. That hit harder than I expected. Marcus had been patient, understanding, supportive of my choice to keep him and my success hidden from my parents. But I'd never fully considered what that meant for him, what it felt like to be erased from someone's family narrative, to be loved in private but denied in public. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't realize how much this was affecting you. Every time you go to Westchester, you come back smaller. Like they've compressed you back into this person you're not. And then it takes days for you to decompress, to remember that you're actually successful and capable and building something incredible. I hate watching that happen to you over and over. He wasn't wrong. After every family dinner, I'd spend days feeling diminished, questioning my choices, wondering if my parents were right and I was just playing at success while real adults did real things. It took distance and time to remember that I was doing real things, that my portfolio was evidence of capability, not delusion. What do you want me to do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tell them. Show them what you've built. Stop letting them define you as a failure when you're actually thriving. You don't need their approval anymore, sophomore. You proved whatever you needed to prove years ago. Now you're just torturing yourself for no reason. The conversation haunted me for weeks. Marcus was right, objectively, rationally right. But the thought of confronting my parents with the truth felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Once I jumped, there was no going back. Either they'd catch me or I'd fall, and I genuinely didn't know which would happen. The universe, apparently tired of waiting for me to make a decision, made it for me. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the fourplex, meeting with contractors to get bids on the renovation work. The building needed cosmetic updates more than structural work, new flooring throughout, kitchen and bathroom updates in all 4 units, fresh paint, and landscaping. I was walking through Unit 3 with a contractor named Jeff, discussing tile options, when my phone rang. It was my mother, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. She typically called on Sundays, our scheduled check-in time, or not at all. Sophia, she said without preamble when I answered. I'm in Austin. My heart stopped. You're what? I'm in Austin. I'm at your apartment actually. I used my key. Where are you? We need to talk. I looked around at the property I was standing in, the property she had no idea I owned, and felt panic rising in my chest. I'm working. What are you doing here? I was in Dallas for a conference and decided to surprise you. But you're not here, and Sophia, we need to discuss your living situation. This apartment is worse than I thought. I'm genuinely concerned. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already motioning to Jeff that we needed to reschedule. The drive from the fourplex to the fake apartment was a blur of panic and strategy. I called Marcus, explained the situation, and listened to him say what I already knew. This is it. You can't keep hiding now. She's going to figure it out eventually. He was right, but I wasn't ready. I'd spent 4 years carefully constructing this facade, and I wasn't prepared to watch it crumble on a random Tuesday afternoon. My mother was sitting in the fake apartment when I arrived, perched on the edge of my deliberately uncomfortable thrift store couch like she was afraid of catching something. She'd arranged herself perfectly, back straight, designer purse on her lap, surveying my supposed home with visible distress. Sophia, she began before I'd even fully entered. This is unacceptable. You're 30 years old living in squalor. The building isn't even secure. The neighborhood is questionable at best. How long were you planning to keep living like this? I sat down across from her, my mind racing through possible responses. It's not that bad. It's affordable and close to work. Affordable, she repeated, as if the word was distasteful. You shouldn't be worried about affordable. You should be building equity, establishing security. This place isn't even suitable for someone half your age. What happens if you get sick? If you have an emergency? You have no safety net here. I have savings, I started to say, but she cut me off. Whatever you've managed to save living like this isn't enough. Sophia, your father and I have been patient. We've waited for you to come to your senses, to recognize that this Austin experiment isn't working. But clearly, you need more direct intervention. We're prepared to make you a serious offer. She opened her purse and pulled out papers, actual printed documents that she must have prepared before flying down. We're offering you $300,000. Enough for a substantial down payment on a proper home in Westchester or Connecticut. You can move back, get a real position at a real company, and start building the life you should have had all along. I stared at the papers in her hand, at the number that would be life-changing for most people, and felt something shift inside me. This was it, the moment I'd been avoiding. I could take the money, accept their vision, and let them believe they'd rescued me from my poor choices. Or I could tell the truth and face whatever came next. Mom, I said slowly, I need to show you something. She looked confused. Show me what? Another apartment you're considering? Because unless it's significantly better than this, I don't think it's worth looking at. No. Something else. Can you follow me in your car? The confusion deepened, but she agreed, probably thinking I was going to show her an apartment I was hoping to rent with their money. We drove in separate cars, her rental following my Tesla, which I suddenly realized was the first crack in the facade. My mother thought I drove a used Honda Civic. She'd never seen the Tesla because I was always careful to park it out of sight when she visited. I saw her face in my rearview mirror when she realized I was driving something expensive. The confusion turning to surprise, turning to what might have been anger. I led her to the duplex, my actual home, and pulled into the driveway. She parked on the street, getting out of her car slowly, surveying the property with an expression I couldn't quite read. What is this? She asked as I walked up to her. This is my house. I bought it 3 years ago. I live in the left unit and rent out the right unit. She stared at me, processing this information like it was in a foreign language. You own this? Yes. I renovated it myself. Want to see inside? I unlocked the door and watched her step into my real life. The hardwood floors that gleamed from regular care. The kitchen with its custom cabinets and granite counters. The living room with its built-in bookshelves and artwork from local galleries. The backyard visible through the French doors, with its garden beds and string lights. This was my home, my real home, and watching my mother see it for the first time felt like standing naked in front of a stranger. She walked through slowly, touching surfaces, examining details, her professional eye assessing everything. This is beautiful, she said finally, and she sounded genuinely confused. I don't understand. If you own this, why are you living in that apartment? I'm not living in that apartment. I keep it for when you visit. This is where I actually live. The realization washed over her face in stages. First confusion, then understanding, then something that might have been hurt. You've been lying to me. For how long? 3 years. Since I bought this place. She sank down onto my couch, the nice one I'd bought from a local furniture maker, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother at a loss for words. She sat there, perfectly composed but clearly struggling to process this information, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The secret was out. Now I'd find out what came next. Why? She asked finally. Why would you hide this from me? Because I knew what you'd do. You'd criticize my choices. You'd offer unsolicited help. You'd try to control how I renovated, where I invested, how I lived. I needed to build this on my own, without your input or your money or your judgment. So instead you let me believe you were failing. You let me worry about you, offer you help, pity you. Do you have any idea how that feels? To discover your daughter has been living a completely different life while you've been concerned about her well-being? Were you concerned about my well-being? I asked, and I heard my voice sharpen. Or were you concerned about how my choices reflected on you? Because every conversation we've had for the last 8 years has been about how I'm not living up to Bennett's standards, not about whether I'm actually happy or fulfilled. That's not fair, she started, but I couldn't stop now. The dam had broken and everything was pouring out. You told your friends I'd probably be renting forever. You said some people aren't meant for homeownership. You offered me money with strings attached, money that would let you control my choices and claim credit for my success. You never once asked if I was actually okay. You just assumed I was failing because I wasn't doing things your way. My mother sat on my couch for a long time without speaking. I watched emotions flicker across her face, each one quickly controlled and replaced by her usual composed mask. Finally, she stood and walked to the French doors, looking out at the backyard I'd cultivated with my own hands. How many properties do you own? She asked, her back still to me. 4. This duplex, and 3 other investment properties. 4 properties at 30. Her voice was strange, hollow almost. And your business? The consulting work I dismissed as computer hobbies? I cleared $200,000 last year. My client roster is full. I turn down more work than I accept. She turned to face me then, and I saw something I'd never seen before in Sophia Bennett's eyes. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was something closer to grief. I've been so wrong about you. Those words, coming from her, felt surreal. I'd spent my entire life waiting for her approval, and now that something resembling it was being offered, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought I was protecting you, she continued. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd avoid the mistakes I made. I married your father because it was expected. I gave up a career I loved because that's what women of my generation did. I spent 30 years building a life that looked perfect from the outside while feeling hollow inside. When you chose differently, I saw it as rebellion rather than wisdom. I sat down slowly, not trusting my legs to keep holding me. I'd never heard my mother speak like this, with such raw honesty. I wanted you to have security, she said. Financial stability, social position, the kind of foundation I thought you needed. What I didn't understand was that you were building all of that yourself, just differently than I would have. And instead of celebrating that, I tried to tear it down. Why? I asked. Why couldn't you just let me find my own way? Because I was terrified you'd fail. And if you failed, it would mean I'd failed as a mother. Your success was supposed to validate my choices, prove that the way I raised you was right. When you rejected that path, it felt like you were rejecting me. We stood there in my living room, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built without her, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. My mother was human, flawed, operating from her own fears and limitations. That didn't excuse the years of criticism and control, but it explained them. I have another property closing next week, I said. A small commercial space I'm converting to mixed use. You could come if you want. See what I actually do. She looked at me with surprise. You'd want me there? I don't know yet. But maybe it's time we started building something real instead of performing our relationship. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. My mother didn't transform overnight into a supportive parent, but she started trying. She called to ask about properties instead of lecturing about my choices. She toured the fourplex mid-renovation and actually offered useful suggestions based on her years of hosting and design. She met Marcus properly, having dinner with us at a restaurant where she asked him real questions about his work and our relationship instead of dismissing him as unsuitable. The fake apartment was dismantled. I gave notice to the landlord and donated the thrift store furniture to a local charity. The relief of not maintaining that elaborate lie was physical, like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was crushing me. My father's reaction was different but equally surprising. When my mother told him about my properties, he'd called me immediately. You did this without any family money, he'd asked, and I'd confirmed. There was a long pause, then something that sounded like pride in his voice. That's remarkable, Sophia. Truly remarkable. I built my business on my father's capital. You built yours from nothing. 3 months after the confrontation, my parents came to Austin for Thanksgiving. Not to the fake apartment they'd once had keys to, but to my real home. I cooked dinner with Marcus's help while my mother sat at my kitchen counter asking questions about my business strategy and investment thesis. My father examined my renovation work with genuine interest, pointing out details I'd gotten right and asking about my process. Christopher came too, bringing his girlfriend, and admitted over wine that he was jealous. "You actually love what you do," he said. "I'm successful but miserable. Maybe I should have been braver like you." As we sat around my dining table, the one I'd refinished myself, eating food prepared in the kitchen I'd designed, I realized this was what I'd been building toward all along. Not just financial success, but the freedom to live authentically. To build relationships based on truth rather than performance. To be seen and valued for who I actually was rather than who I was supposed to be. My mother raised her glass before dinner. "To Sophia," she said, and I heard her voice catch slightly. "Who taught me that there are many ways to build a successful life, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose your own path even when everyone tells you you're wrong." It wasn't perfect. We still had difficult conversations. She still sometimes slipped into old patterns of judgment. But we were building something new, something real, and that was enough. 6 months later, when I closed on my 5th property, a small apartment building that would serve as my retirement fund, both my parents attended the closing. My mother brought champagne. My father brought a leather-bound notebook where he'd written investment advice he wished someone had given him at my age. We celebrated at my home afterward, my real home, where I could be my real self. I'd started this journey wanting to prove them wrong. I'd ended it discovering something better, that I didn't need their approval to be successful, but having their acceptance made the success feel complete. The empire I'd built in shadows could finally stand in the light, and it was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.